All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, we've been reporting on election 2019 this week, and I didn't want you to miss out on a genuinely historic result which occurred in Kentucky. So for the first time in state history, Kentucky elected an African-American to the post of Attorney General. Daniel Cameron, a former Mitch McConnell aide, became the first African-American elected in their own right to actually any statewide office in the Bluegrass state, a state which, by the way, is overwhelmingly conservative and 87% white. I'm sure you were well aware of Cameron's trailblazing election, though, given the overwhelming celebration of his achievement by civil rights leaders, Democratic politicians, elite media, and all of the folks who typically celebrate such identity-based achievements, right? The white women who were horrified when AOC endorsed white man Bernie Sanders, the pundits who told me you have to be sexist not to support a woman, and those who support Kamala because of her identity as a black woman, they must have been elated by Daniel Cameron's victory, right? After all, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So if the thing that matters is identity politics, surely Cameron's victory would be widely celebrated. Wait, what's that you say? Virtually no Democratic politician said a damn thing? Weird. Perhaps that's because identity politics is a thin gruel to be offered by the Democratic Party establishment, corporatists, and media elites in lieu of actually delivering anything of consequence. And the lack of even one mention of Daniel Cameron's election shows you that they are well aware just how shallow it really is. Now look, I don't want to pretend that race and gender glass ceiling breaking is meaningless. It's not. I loved that the first president my kids knew was a black man. It does make a difference to see people of color and women in leadership roles. But if those people pursue the same racist, classist, elitist, crappy policies as their white brothers and sisters, well, it's not really change we can believe in, is it? If you're an immigrant getting deported, does it matter to you that the deporter-in-chief is the first African-American president? If you're in jail for marijuana possession or because your kids were truant at school, does it make a difference that it's Kamala Harris who gleefully prosecuted you? Aren't you delighted that Kellyanne Conway was the first woman to run a successful presidential campaign? The truth is so obvious that it's actually embarrassing to state it. What you do, the policies you advocate for, and the people that you help matters. And it matters a lot more than having equal diverse representation in the advocacy and implementation of racist anti-working class policies. It was Democrats who put in place the racist 100-to-1 crack sentencing disparity. Thanks a lot, Joe Biden. Democrats who proudly destroyed welfare as we know it. Democrats who let the banksters off the hook so they could pillage African American and Hispanic communities with their subprime mortgages of mass destruction. I could spend the next 10 hours in a filibuster of woke Democratic hypocrisy on this issue. Just consider Tulsi Gabbard. She's a woman of color running for president. Why does she get zero love from the left? It's because she doesn't step in line for the pro-war policies that have hijacked the party. If you're a millennial drowning in student debt, do you care that President Platitude Pete the Millennial is the one who lets you keep drowning in your student debt? If you're one of the parents of the 70,000 people per year that die of an overdose, do you care about the race, gender, or sexual orientation of the political coward who continues our racist and inhumane war on drugs? Woke people need to wake up. If the Democratic Party wants to win and wants to be about something, then do something for the multiracial working class instead of just changing the race of the so-called leader that runs palliative care for the working people in the giant hospice that both rural and urban America have become. And by the way, if you don't believe the suffering of the white working class is just as real as that of the black and brown working class because they have privilege, people have watched their jobs shipped overseas and their towns flooded with drugs and their young people sent off to die in war, all by a bipartisan consensus, then you are just as heartless as those who would put precious immigrant babies in detention centers. This isn't a suffering Olympics where we get to stand in judgment of who is most oppressed. If Democrats want to be the party of working people, then they can't pick and choose which people. And if they want to continue being the party of the professional managerial class, throwing a bone of identity politics to the black and brown working class to keep them in the tent simply because at least we're not out and out racist like the other team, well, that is not a party I want to be part of. I was listening yesterday to Bernie Sanders' interview with Mehdi Hasan on his podcast Deconstructed. Mehdi asked Sanders if he would commit to a vice president who was not another white guy. Take a listen.
All I'm saying is you wouldn't rule out an all-white or an all-male ticket. You're not saying there has to be any conditions.
Look, we have months to go. We will take a look at the best potential candidates who are out there. We're not ruling out anything right now.
That's what I was just checking. You're
strongest
not ruling out anything.
And best. But this is what I will say, which is most important. Trust me, that my vice presidential candidate will be a strong progressive.
My vice presidential candidate will be a strong progressive, period. It actually takes courage to say that the ideology matters first and foremost. And if it's a woman or a person of color, so much the better. So Democrats, you have a choice. Celebrate Daniel Cameron. Celebrate it when he prosecutes women for trying to get an abortion. Celebrate rollbacks of worker protections and more mass incarceration because at least he's the right color. Or get off this idea that identity politics are the only thing that matters, because by the complete silence on Cameron's election, you have shown that obviously it's not. Leave your identity politics at the door and start evaluating people by the content of their character and their record, and not by some BS woke signaling that no one believes anymore, including, I might add, the demographic groups you're pandering to. Otherwise, prepare for another 4 years of this.
Look how much African American communities have suffered under Democratic control. To those I say the following: what do you have to lose?
It was pretty stark. I actually went and Googled, somebody must have said something about the fact that he was the first African American elected statewide ever. Nothing.
Yeah, they won't say anything.
Nothing.
It's funny because I remember Kellyanne, that was her favorite line right after. She was like, I'm the first woman to successfully run a presidential campaign. And it's funny because a lot of this is a trolling aspect, which is that if you know that it would have been the Hillary Clinton campaign, that it would have been, it would have been nauseating, the amount of oh my gosh, we did it and all this. And yet, if anything similar is accomplished on the Republican side, I mean, the amount of celebration of it would be 1/20th, 1/25th of the similarity. And that's because there's not a consistency. And what you're getting at is that there shouldn't be a consistency because this whole standard is ridiculous. It should be all about class politics, is that making it and focusing it solely upon this racial and gender identity for how we can talk across different people is just not, and that's just not how you create a cohesive body politic. You can't. We can't be a functioning democracy that way.
Well, and it's completely for people who engage in this kind of politics, it's completely obvious when you're talking about a Sarah Palin, when you're talking about a Kellyanne Conway, when you're talking about a Daniel Cameron, you go, well, of course, we won't support them no matter their gender or race because the policies are not what we support and we think they're bad for people. But when it's AOC backing Bernie Sanders, because she has legitimate ideological reasons to do so, it's like, oh my God, how could she do that? How could she stab women in the back that way? There's such a lack of awareness around this.
It was
whole thing.
During the Women's March, whenever they excluded the pro-life women who were like, we want to be a part of the Women's March, and they're like, no, you're not part of this. It's like, well, wait a second here. What is this actually about? And that's where the farce of it all just begins to collapse. And if you want to have a democratic march, go ahead, right? But don't speak on behalf of all people. That's what really, I think, drives some people on the right especially crazy, is that speaking on behalf of communities. I mean, as somebody myself, I get called a race traitor all the time for my beliefs, and I'm like, excuse me, the whole point of coming to America is so we didn't have to live in these structures of race and caste and all these old world institutions which were imposed on us, which you get born into. It's about you get to choose to be whatever you want to be, and if you don't, which we currently live in an economic system that behaves that way, then we should fight for one that actually makes it so that we can.
Yeah, and like I said, I do think it represents progress that we elected the first black president. But even more important than that is the policies that are pursued and how it impacts black, brown, and other oppressed communities around this country every day. Exactly. And that's where the emphasis should be. Next on Rising, Democrats are putting out the big bucks for major ad campaigns. Former Trump campaign officials are expressing concerns about the GOP's strength in the suburbs.
And Republicans are split on how to conduct a Hunter Biden investigation. The Hill's editor-in-chief Bob Cusack is going to debrief us all on this next.